the paradox of creativity is you have to do it for you first.
Hmm.
You know, make Bendis would always say, make the book you want to see.
Welcome back to Inspired Inc., the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Bloxdorf, and today on the show, we have creator Tony Wolf joining us, and we talk about how pursuing two passions can both benefit the other, the creative struggle of balancing both passions and life, and why even slow progress is great progress as a creator. All this and so much more on today's Inspired Inc. How do you
Mhm.
make that transition or how that connection between acting and comics? Where does that come into play into your life? I'm really curious about that.
Well, so I love them both. I love them both pretty much equally. Although I think I like acting like 10% more, only because for me acting is collaborative and it's social. And as we know, to get comics done, it's a lot of time sitting by yourself. Uh,
Yep.
because I write and draw most of my own stuff, but I'll occasionally illustrate other people's stories if I like the story and if I trust the person. Um,
Hmm.
but illustration is and writing is so solitary.
Yeah.
Um, However, having said that, the thrill of creative work is the same in both. Um, and I'm also a singer, so I've made music and I've done singing projects with bands and with friends. I think for me, it's like the creative high, the creative thrill of all of them has a common like vibrational wavelength of the
Yeah.
joy of creativity and the joy of making something artistic, whether it's art, art with a capital A, but whether it's art like drawings, comic book pages, or
Oh man,
whether
it's
it's
gorgeous.
a movie or a book or a song with friends. For me, uh, I when I was a teenager, I really was dead set on being an illustrator full time. When I was a
Yeah.
kid, I was pretty I was that 12-year-old who was like, I'm gonna be a Marvel artist. I'm gonna be a DC artist. I would read countless interviews as a teenager with, the big illustrators, the big writers, the editors.
Hmm.
Um, I even went to somehow I got like an interview at DC for an internship when I was like
Cool.
18 or 17. And this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s. And I think it was a guy named Bob Greenberger who was an editor in charge of their paperbacks. He was like a paperback collections editor. And for
Yeah.
whatever reason, I got in front of him. I don't know how. I was lucky enough to do that. And I had been, as a teenager, I had a 150-page comic that
Oh
I did.
wow.
I wrote and drew and lettered all by hand on paper from
Yeah.
seventh from seventh grade to first year of college. I churned out
Man.
150 pages. Um, and it was a superhero. It was okay. I mean, it was adequate for a teenager. It was good for a
Yeah.
teenager, but you know, and it was very much a result of all the comics, the stew of all 70s and 80s comics that I was obsessed with. Um, and the editor at DC said, the classic like, you're pretty good, kid, but you need more time in the oven. Like, get back to
Yeah.
us when your technique is a little better, when you've got some more years under your belt. And he was absolutely right. And for me, I I got more and more serious about acting because again, I love acting and I love all that stuff. It's just more social. And I'm a weird,
Yeah.
like a lot of I mean, you may be like this as well. Would you say you're more of an introvert, extrovert, or a mixture of both?
Oh, it's a total mixture of both. I mean,
Yeah.
I need my quiet alone time for sure, you know what I mean, where I could
Yes.
focus on stuff, but I'm like we met and we just clicked because we could both just talk and we were just on it and
Yes.
just talking and introducing to new people and networking, and that's the way I
Yes.
function very
Yes.
highly in any job or atmosphere. And then I could turn around and be like, "Well, I got to go draw this or write this for the next 3 hours." So got to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a little bit harder, but I do love that time. And once I get
Yes.
sucked into it, I'm vibing, I'm there, I'm more than happy. But if I'm at a convention, I'm also just ecstatic. I'm never like, dreading any of those type of interactions. I love
Yeah.
going up to each person and seeing what happens, you know?
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, so I also, similar to you, like you, I'm a mix. I'm an introvert and extrovert. Although they do
Hmm.
say what the INFP or INFJ, whatever, like
Yeah, something
they
like that.
say it's what replenishes you that's the main thing. And I have to
Hmm.
say, usually what replenishes me, if I'm fatigued, what replenishes me is the alone time or the quiet
Yeah.
time. Um,
Yeah.
but but comics, the networking is social, but the execution of comics has to be focused, probably
Hmm.
pretty solitary. Um, I have, we all have friends and relatives who don't understand anything about comics, right? They're like
100%. Yeah.
those people that say, "Gosh, they still make comics," like
Right. Yeah. 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 Exactly.
people who are like, "How I thought computers." Did those now. Um, and what I tell those people to give them a frame of reference, I'm like, Stephen King has written God knows how many books. And
Hmm.
if you read interviews with writers, with novelists, they have to go into like a cabin in the woods for 3 months to get it
Yep.
done. Or they have to
Yep.
go in the office in the other section of the house to get it done. Um,
Hmm.
as a result, by the way, it's kind of funny. I haven't had time to focus and draw in like 3 months. I owe someone a pinup for Relic Hunter, that book by Adam Lemna, who you've talked to him, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Great dude. Yeah. We
Cosmic
got to get him on the
Lion.
show at some point.
Oh, he's terrific. He's the nice, and also he's both film and acting, and he's both film and writing and illustrating comics because
Hmm.
he's a professional film editor in Hollywood.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And he's also directed. He's a great guy, very multi-talented. So I started this. This is so the issue 2 of Relic Hunter, by the way, which is a Cosmic
Hmm.
Lion book as well. Issue 1 was kind of a Conan the Barbarian riff.
Hmm.
And then issue 2, they do that thing that I think Marvel did in the 80s where there's a time travel and they plop him in Manhattan in the late
There you go. Yep.
70s.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I had the idea of doing like an Escape from New York movie poster, sort of like riff. And
So
like
cool.
the old Escape from New York kind of logo.
Yeah.
Um, so this will be, the barbarian kind of a thing.
Love
Anyway,
it.
so this has been on my drawing table. I probably started it 4 months ago, and there was the holidays, there was Christmas and New Year's. Then I got an
Hmm.
acting job that took over my life for a month and a half. And then I still have a day job like some of us do.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and then there was IC3, and then there was Mocha. And then funnily, I've actually been asked to help out on 2 documentaries recently, one of
I've
which
seen
is
that.
about comic books. And
Ooh.
the other documentary is about a famous band from the 80s that a friend of mine became buddies with the band. So it's sort of like a niche band, almost like if you it's almost like the Flaming Lips, that
Oh,
kind of
nice.
like niche, or the
Yeah,
Dead Milk
exactly.
or the Dead Milkmen from the 80s. Like
Oh my
it's
gosh.
that
Yes,
level
there
of
you
like.
go. Yeah.
So anyway, I haven't had time. I have other comics I've been working on. But I did actually, someone who's not, he's Eli Schwab is of course the Cosmic Lion
Yeah.
publisher. This
Hmm.
guy is Eli Schwab adjacent. he's
Oh, wow.
His name is Brandon. I don't is Brandon the same name as yours.
There you go.
He's done series called Thready. He's doing a Love and Rockets tribute book.
Oh, how cool.
And it's like 30 or 40 illustrators. All what they're doing is it's very similar to Batman Year One, that Batman Year One parody that they did,
Yeah.
or the
Mhm.
Weapon X tribute that was called Weapon X,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
there you go.
so I have here, this is everyone's redrawing a page from Love and Rockets #1, the very first Love and Rockets, which was like a zine almost, if you see
Yeah,
the
pretty
original
much.
Love and Rockets. So I wanted to draw the page where Maggie is like repairing
Nice.
it's repair
That's
woman,
so
repair
great.
person Maggie, and they're driving in
Yeah.
the space car, the hovercraft car or whatever.
That's
Um,
so cool. Dude, yeah, that Maggie the
so
Mechanic, like, whole series, it's just so much fun. That's so cool you get to,
yeah.
like, even recreate that and bring it to life. It looks fantastic too.
Oh, thank you. So this is a long story. This is a circuitous answer to your question. As far as acting and comics, the other thing, of course, comics are filmic. They are
Yeah.
storyboards, right?
Mhm,
Comics is about camera angles
mhm.
and pacing and storytelling. So I think almost everyone who makes comics, most of them are usually at least movie or film fans,
Mhm.
because in order to execute the illustration of a comic book page, you've got to think in camera angles,
Yep. Yeah,
you know.
exactly.
Um, and so for me, my dream goal, and I'm going to put this out here, and so far it's creeping closer to manifesting in reality. You look at certain actors, right? You look at actors. They're successful actors, whether they're hugely famous or not. You need to be just enough to keep making money to get, at the very least, you just don't want to have a day job anymore. You just want to be an actor.
Mhm.
And a lot of these actors, they're making films or TV 8 months out of the year, or 7 months out of the year, or 10 months out of the year. And then on the other months, they're writing a novel or they're painting. And for
Mhm.
me, also, do you know who Jeffrey Lewis is? He makes comics and he has a successful band.
Oh, I don't
Jeffrey
recall.
Lewis.
I'll look into him. That doesn't sound
Look
not
up
off the
a
top of my
guy
head for
named
sure.
Jeffrey Lewis. He is an kind of a niche indie comics guy.
Mhm.
Um, and he has a successful indie band I think
That's
it's called the
rad.
Jeffrey Lewis Band. And
Oh,
he
rad.
does a comic that's like part autobio, part fantasy called Fuff,
Oh,
F U
wow,
F
that's
F.
interesting. That
The
sounds real
guy's
familiar.
amazing. And I don't think he's like wealthy, but his whole year is either touring with the band, making albums, or writing and drawing his own comics.
That's rad.
And not a lot of people know about him, but he's a terrific guy. And by the way, one of his songs, uh, like he made a song that became like almost a viral hit, and then a big deal filmmaker wanted to like expand on it or make a movie out of the song. It might have been Michel Gondry from back in the
Oh,
early 2000s.
that's
Uh,
cool.
anyway, he's a fast look up Jeffrey Lewis. It's spelled just like Jeffrey and just like Lewis,
Right.
Lewis, as opposed to
Oh, rad.
LU. But I have always thought, like Ethan Hawke, he makes a lot of movies and then he writes novels, he writes books of poetry. I was like,
Mhm.
that's my goal. I want to be make I feel frustrated, Brandon, that I haven't had time to properly sit down and focus on getting back to comics.
Oh, yeah.
And I made these New York Times comics. I made 4 of them. The only reason I haven't done more, or at least pitched more, is that I haven't had time because I have this day job. And I only work 4 days a week. Even with the 4-day a week day job, I really haven't had
It's
that much
rough.
free time.
'Cause you
What's
need
that?
your resting points too. Like, you need to, like, take a moment to breathe and rest and just, like, sit and absorb, everything you've been doing and catch up to your body and your brain and to, like,
Yes.
kinda rejuvenate too, and bouncing and I totally know what you mean. Like, I haven't written a comic since maybe January, I did something really quick, like a 4-pager recently that I was
Right.
even doing at my day job. I was like speak to text to trying to like get it done and
Yes.
sent like a script to
Oh,
a
that's
friend. I was like, "Can
awesome.
you just clean this up?" Yeah, that was the closest thing. But with the day job and the podcasting and then doing some
Yeah.
contract work on the side, like plus just life, I'm in the middle of a move right now, and that's just
Right.
taking over a whole lot. Like it's hard to sit down and be like, I want to finish this task, this project I was working on for
Yeah.
months, forever, and it hurts, but that's good that you have, like, the craving for it, and, the more you
Yes.
build that craving to get back to it, the more satisfying it's gonna be, the more enriched it's gonna be, and you might even look at it with better eyes and better focus, and that's what I always enjoy is,
Yes.
like, just let that craving be there because as long as it's there, that itch, I'm gonna get to it, and it's gonna be
Yes.
great, but it's trying to
Well,
get to that itch because it's driving you crazy, you know?
yes. It's funny, you know the writer Ed Brubaker? You
Mhm.
probably know of Ed
Yeah.
Brubaker. So that guy has been writing and making comics for decades,
Yeah.
and he started doing semi-autobiographical comics
Mhm.
about his kind of like hipster friends, I think in Portland or Seattle or something.
Yeah.
I think it was called Deadbeat. I think it was
Yeah,
called
that sounds about
Deadbeat.
right.
And he wrote and illustrated his own comics at the time.
That's so wild
Um,
too.
but I would read interviews with writers my entire life. And for
What were
many
your
years,
resources
Brandon,
then?
what's that?
I'm curious about that. What were your resources for like diving into those articles? Because I would read a lot of like Comics Journal. I'd go and find back issues and like Comic Book
Yes.
Magazine and stuff like that. Those are the stuff
Yeah.
I
So,
really love like getting into.
yeah. So because I was an 80s kid, Comics Journal, yes. Amazing
Mhm.
Heroes. Do you remember Amazing Heroes? Or
Amazing
you've
Heroes.
heard of
Yeah,
it?
I have a couple issues. Yeah.
Right. So Comics Journal, Amazing Heroes. There was a smaller magazine called Comic Scene,
Oh
like
yeah.
comics
Yeah, for sure.
space, and I think it was like by the Fangoria publishers.
Hmm. Yep.
Right? It
Yeah.
was like their comics, they had their movies, sci-fi, horror. Starlog, right, was the Fangoria's publishers sci-fi magazine was called Starlog.
Oh, it's cool.
And then they did this thing which I think only lasted about 5 years called Comics Scene.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that that was another companion to the Amazing Heroes Comics Journal. There was also in the early 80s and late 70s a physical newspaper called Comics Buyer's Guide,
Oh, yep. Yeah.
which I feel like I'm glad you've at least heard of it. A lot of the younger people I don't think have ever even heard of it, but
No, they just go online for all that. But that was such a
yes.
heavy resource on everything, and that
Yeah.
was like a vital book to like monitor your collection and like look through things and
Yeah.
find value points and also find missing things too. Did they
Yes.
have interviews in them as well?
Well, Comic Buyer's Guide, they didn't have interviews, but they did have articles and columns. Peter David
Mm,
wrote a regular column on it, uh,
that's cool.
long ago. There was also a guy who was a lawyer who wrote Tony Isabella, who I believe co-created Black Lightning, the superhero Black
Oh,
Lightning.
rad.
He's also an attorney. And so he wrote a column about anytime legal stuff showed up in comics, he wrote a column about whether they sort of got it right or not.
Wow, that's interesting. That's super cool. I would love to check that out because there's so many instances where like we need some legal advice to really
Yes.
understand what's going on here. I didn't realize that the Comics Buyer's Guide had those articles. I gotta hunt some down then. I
Yeah,
love hunting
there's
down these
probably
old
some
magazines.
remnants of those online. The the legal column by Tony Isabella, it was called "The Law Is a Ass," and it was purposely like grammatically because I think the quote was from something in like the 1700s
Oh
where,
wow.
some wise ass like society is this and society is a blank, the society is a tumbleweed and the law is a ass.
Oh
That
my
was
gosh, that's awesome.
and so he decided to call the column "The Law Is a Ass."
Ah, that's so
Um,
cool. That's amazing.
but so I was gobbling up all these interviews because there was some part of me that knew I was going to end up either an actor or a writer or an illustrator or both. But the
Mhm.
point of all this is that Ed Brubaker, he would say, I have all these stories, but like you and I were saying, Brandon, there's only so many hours in a day. You also have to do life stuff, run your
Yeah.
errands, your relationship, if you are in a relationship that's a long-term
Mhm.
relationship, your family stuff, siblings, job, you want to keep up friendships. So and I used to never think of myself as a writer. I knew I could
Mm.
draw adequately, reasonably well, hopefully, and I knew I was an actor, and I knew I liked to sing. But I always said to myself, "Oh, I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer," because
Hmm.
I didn't really come up with fiction plots for the most part. And but I knew I could write essays. I knew I was like an English major mentality. And Ed Brubaker said, I have like 20 years worth of stories I want to do, but it takes 8 months to get one story done. And
Yep.
then, so he said he had, like you said, that hunger, that excitement, and that thirst and that enthusiasm. You have like a notebook full of ideas. Grant Morrison always says he has a
Oh.
notebook. Grant
Yep.
Morrison, they have a notebook full of ideas, right?
Mhm.
And I would read those things as a teenager or when I was in college, and I would feel jealous. I would say, I wish I had a list of story ideas it was just a matter of time and months to get to. And I would feel envy. I would not the bad kind of jealousy is like, I don't want them to have that. No,
Right. Right.
I always want people to have success. Other people should
Mhm.
have great success also. It's like there's not a scarcity. There's enough to go around. I
Mhm.
firmly believe, like, spiritually, if one person succeeds, that doesn't mean I don't. I think
Right.
it's a spreading the wealth, and also everyone's individual artistic voice is apples and oranges. So my success over here doesn't really affect the other person's success because we're
Yeah.
different people. We have different things to offer.
Exactly.
So, but I read something years ago about psychology. When you feel envy or jealousy, that's envy is like a neon sign towards your heart to what you aspire to for yourself.
Oh, wow.
So I always said, I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer. I don't understand writing. I don't understand. But I would read writers' interviews, lengthy interviews, and I would feel jealousy or envy. And what I realized eventually is that deep down, I want to be a writer. Like,
Yep.
you know, but I would say to myself, oh, but I don't have the plot ideas. I don't think I write dialogue very well. I don't come up with unique characters. So that kind of just bubbled in my subconscious for years. And I focused on acting because with acting, you didn't have to be a writer. Obviously, I also focused on acting because sitting alone drawing 10 hours a day, eventually I started to fall out of love with that being my entire
Burnout.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, you start to get fried out, and then you're looking at the same thing over and over, and it starts to
Yes.
hurt sometimes. You know what I mean? Yeah,
Yes.
you're very much like me. You have to have another thing to distract your mind for a bit to like you
Yeah.
said, refresh
Yeah.
yourself and re-excite yourself for what you want to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know?
And so
Yeah.
and again, I would miss the social aspect of life when
Hmm.
I locked myself up in the tower at the college and did an art project. I was like, where's the human beings?
Yeah.
I miss the human contact. So I focused on acting for many years. And then I had a friend named Mike Turney, who now is a film director. And he was like, look, if the acting isn't, if the success in acting isn't coming right now, he said, you love drawing, you're a good artist. He said, you got to make your own comics because then you're not waiting for the tastemakers to tap you on the shoulder. You're not
Oh.
waiting for the casting directors. And I would say, Mike, but I can't write. I don't know what to write. He said, you actually are a writer. You just don't know it yet. He was one of those supportive friends.
Yeah.
And he said, if you're not coming up with fiction, do autobio. Do
Hmm.
do Harvey Picard, do autobio. And he bugged me for like 4 years. He was like, I'm not taking no for an answer. This friend, Mike Turney, who, by the way, I think he's about to have his first like major film kind of blow up at a horror festival that he
Oh,
wrote and
yeah.
directed. So look for that. In about 9 months, we might be talking a lot of in the mainstream news about Michael Turney. Mike Turney is his
Oh,
name.
that's
Um,
super exciting.
so, but he would bug the heck out of me. You got to write. You got to write your own comic. I don't want to write. I'll draw, but I don't want to write. You know, this thing would go back and forth with this friend, and eventually he's like, "Look, you got to do it," because he just kept saying, "You got to do it." So then I turned 40 years old, and he wore me down. Right? He wore me down. And I was like, because I kept it secret that I drew because I was afraid of acting buddies going, "Oh, you actually draw? Well, then acting is so competitive. You should just go draw because acting is really hard and you're not getting famous. You're not getting big success at this point." So eventually I said, "All right, I'm 40 years old. I'm going to do what this friend keeps bugging me to do. I will write some autobio stories because I didn't really feel like I had fiction that I was excited about to write."
Hmm.
And so I thought, but autobio, I could probably get away with it. And so I started making autobio comics about. It took me 8 months of reflection to figure out, what am I going to write about? Even autobio, right? Your whole
Hmm.
life is a tapestry of tons of things. So eventually I honed in on something that I thought was good and might be sort of marketable,
Hmm.
maybe, about living in the hipster area of Williamsburg and Greenpoint at a time when they had sort of blown up. Like the
Nice.
Williamsburg thing, at the
Yep.
time it was very new. And Greenpoint was like the bleed over from Williamsburg and had blown up. So I said, this will be an exercise. And by the way, Brandon, it's funny. You have your passion work as well in comics and your publishing imprint. Don't you find sometimes, a lot of times, some of the best things come out when you just say, I'm just going to do this for me as an experiment?
Oh, yeah.
And
That's how
Rick Rubin,
all
the
of it
famous
happened.
producer, what's that?
That's how everything's happened basically in the last year and a half of my life. Yeah. Just like,
Yes.
well, let's just see what happens. And you know what? I'm just going to declare this and we're going to find out the result, you know?
Yes. And Rick Rubin, the famous music producer and musician, there's now all these videos on Instagram of him saying exactly this.
Yeah.
And it's not news. I mean, he's not the first person to say it. He's obviously an inspirational figure. David Bowie, all these people. The paradox of creativity is you have to do it for you first.
Hmm.
You know, make Bendis would always say, make the book you want to see.
Yep.
Make the book, or Dean Haspiel, gave this advice to people. Make the book that's not in the bookstore yet. If you were a reader, make the book that you would want to buy as a reader that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. There you go.
So I took that approach, and within 8 months, I was getting blurbs in like mainstream New York magazines that were not about comics, right? That were not typically focused on comics in New York City. And I thought, oh, all right, my little experiment is bearing some fruit. So I'll just keep making more experiments. And and then, I found friends who would support me and do some coloring. My friend Thomas Griffin did self-publish, he self-published the first couple of books, small indie publishing, mini comics. So
Nice.
Thomas started doing mini comics of my books. I would conceive it, write it, draw it, and Thomas would color it and self-publish it. And
Nice.
so now I had not only web comics that were on, I got the web comics hosted on many websites for free.
Hmm.
And now we had a physical mini comic from this self-publisher. And, it was like smaller than most mini comics even.
Oh,
But
wow.
now I had a physical comic. So then it's the networking and the hustling, right?
Yep. Yep.
Networking and hustling. Basically, I've turned out 2 or 3 short stories a year, plus a few pinups, plus a few covers and posters. And I said to myself, all right, this is my recipe. I still have a day job. I'm still doing acting work or voiceover work, narration for commercials,
Oh,
documentaries. what I can do with the bandwidth that I have in a year of my life, 2 or 3 short stories of comics, plus some bonus art, pinups,
Mhm.
commissions, do the day job, some voiceover work, some acting work, and that's what I can do. That's my recipe.
I love
If
that.
I were a trust fund kid, or if I was independently wealthy, I could turn out a lot more art and comics.
Oh, yeah.
Or if I was getting more acting work that got in the way of the art and comics, well, then that would be a good problem quote to have. I'm just
Yeah,
getting too
yeah.
much acting work. I can't make comics because I'm a successful actor and I'm always running off to film sets. Um, so anyway, that became my recipe. 2 or 3, like you just said it, Brandon, a 4-pager, a 5-page story.
Yep.
You can get that done at least, right?
Yep, exactly. And that gives you that satisfaction to like hit those markers to make sure you're in check with what you want to do. And when you step away, you can at least know that there's something in the works, there's something, you'll go back to for sure. And I love
Yes.
that because when you divide yourself a bit, what you learned in acting, I'm sure pays off in writing and comics and vice versa. So bouncing
Yes.
between the two, I'm sure keeps your
Yes.
brain very fresh and very like progressive in the sense of how you're going to approach something new, or it sparks
Yes.
an idea that you were stuck on. And I love how that type of life interplays because sometimes when you are focused on one thing, you can get stagnant, you can get stuck and be like, I don't
Mhm.
know if I should go left, right, up, or down, but put it aside and go do another gig. All of a sudden, you're just fresh at the board. And that's
Yes.
honestly, I'm same way. I have so many side projects going on that when I can't, I want to get to them, but I can't. Or even when I am, I'm just like, well, this writing made the next script better. And it's all
Yes.
practice to enhance the next one.
Yes. And to go back to an earlier thread, when I said I would read Ed Brubaker in particular, saying he had a
Mhm.
whole notebook, or Grant Morrison saying they have a whole notebook of stories, I would feel envy. Well, now, 15, 20 years later, now I am in their world because I have a notebook of stories. I have a notebook of things. I finally have ideas. For me,
Yeah.
they happen to be nonfiction ideas, right? They
Hmm.
happen to be either autobio, or it's what they sort of call like journalism comics, where it's, Josh Neufeld is a guy who's made a whole career out of journalism
Mm.
comics.
Yep.
Uh, there's a guy named Durf. Do you know Durf Backdurf?
That
Durf
sounds
is an
familiar as
indie guy.
well.
He just did a comic about a graphic novel about the Kent State massacre during the Vietnam era.
Oh, wow. That's
And it's
cool.
winning all these
Interesting.
awards. It's called Kent State. He researched like crazy for like 6 years. He also worked as a garbage man and then made an award-winning graphic novel about the experience of working as a garbage man.
Oh,
And it's
wow.
called
Cool.
Trashed. And it's amazing. It's this
That's so
guy's
sick.
Oh, he did a graphic novel called My Friend Dahmer because he was childhood acquaintances with Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, okay. That's where I've heard that name before. I've
And
heard of
that
that
got
one.
made into a huge Hollywood film.
Okay, I know exactly what you're talking about then, because I know that book in very specific, and so I've seen the other works put together around it.
Yes.
Okay, that's all adding up
And
now.
so I mean, I love fiction. I love fiction and I love
Mhm.
superhero stuff. I love non-superhero stuff. I love all storytelling. I love
Yeah.
the mainstream. I love the indie. Just like with film, I love my blockbuster films. I love my intelligent artsy films that no one sees, or very
Yep.
few people see. I love the weird super indies. I love the A24. It's like I just
Yep.
want good stories to consume as a fan,
Yeah.
because that's the funny thing. We're fans also, you
Yep.
know. And the greatest, I've met some celebrity actors, and the ones that haven't let their egos go to their heads, they're still fans. They're
Yep.
fans first and foremost, who eventually graduated to making films, making acting, making movies, TV. So it's like, as long as we keep humble, and as long as we keep that excited fan inside our hearts alive, then we're in good shape.
Yeah, no, and I always refer to it as like my diet. It's what I'm consuming at that point,
Yeah.
and it's I try to keep my diet very fresh, very exciting. I
Yes.
try not to put too. You could have some junk in your diet, but not too much. You know what I mean? To
Yes.
indulge in, like all of it, kind of shapes you and what you become as a creator too, because your diet is what you're gonna be influenced by, and then spit back out,
Yes.
and
Yes.
kind of refresh and take in your own ways, and and become inspired.
Yes.
Dude, that's so exciting. There's so much to unpack there in general, but so much to resonate with. You know what I mean? Because even when you're talking about like art and your that envy you had, that envy when I watched that Grant Morrison documentary when I was
Oh,
first declaring myself as a writer, and he talks about those notebooks and everything, and that same documentary's come up in the last couple episodes, which is kind of funny.
oh,
Talking with
interesting. By
God.
the way, I'm
Yeah.
friends. I'm friends with the guy who made that. The guys who made
Oh,
that.
really? Oh, how
I'm actually
exciting.
I'm in that documentary, but as a voiceover twice. I did two voiceovers for that documentary.
Oh, wow. I've heard your voice many times over the years before
So
we've
it's
even
it's
met
called
then.
Talking with Gods, right? That's the
Yeah.
Grant Morrison
Yep.
documentary.
Mhm. Yep.
So by the
Yeah.
quick plug for them, the filmmakers are Patrick Meany, who
Uh-huh.
is an old friend, and the DP, the cinematographer and co-director, co-creator for a lot of Patrick's films, is named Jordan Rennert. So Patrick
Oh,
Meany and
cool.
Jordan Rennert. Rennert, it's like Jeremy Renner, but with a T at the end.
Oh,
Jordan Rennert,
okay.
and they're New York City area guys. Um,
Nice.
and I had a podcast about pop culture geek stuff. We had them as a guest on my podcast. It was called The Action Room back in
Ooh,
like 2004. And it was just
nice.
all geek, anything geeky. And we just thought The Action Room was a interesting, fun
Yeah,
title that would
great title.
encompass that. And that's when they had just gotten the green light from Grant Morrison to make that documentary.
How
Um,
cool. Man.
anyway, but wait, go back. I'm just what a synchronicity. Speaking of like spiritual
Yeah.
synchronicities.
I
So
mean, I
wait,
just
your
talked to
previous
Tony McMillan and Rick Lopez, and we all had talked about Grant Morrison for like 15 minutes on each episode, which is hilarious that we're
and they
dialing back
referenced
to
that
that.
documentary?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Super exciting. It's so funny. That's so just trippy at
Yes.
that point. But it's crazy because that shows how influential that was and how much that like impacted all of us to stick with us. And when you're talking about that book of ideas, like completely, there was a point where I was like, I don't know if I'll ever have more than one idea. And then I started
Right.
working on comics, and I was like, man, are these four stories all I have in me? And just in the last like 2.5 months, I've developed like two more projects. And I was like, no, you just got to
Nice.
wait. You just got to sit and you got to wait,
Yes.
and they're going
It's
to come
very
to you,
interesting. Yes.
You have to live life. You have to experience some stuff. You have to like
Yes.
figure out what
That's
you
the other
like
thing.
and are
Yeah.
passionate about.
It makes you a more well-rounded creative person,
It
you know,
does
to
completely.
to
Because
just
if you
live the
don't,
360 live the totality of the life experience.
yeah, because that's what you're just talking about, the creator that made a story just about, living as a garbage man. I mean, that is one of those things where it's like he's just pulling from life, you
Yep.
seeking out how do I start as a comic book creator? Like, how do I
Yep.
really start, finding my voice as a writer? You do
Yes.
autobiographical stuff. And then it's like, okay, like that's your life experience that you're pulling from there. Even with my nonfiction stuff, like Teenage Babylon, it's a teenage cosmic punk rock love story, and it's like that's a lot of pulling from life, but then some life
Nice.
interests that have come along the way too, but it's
Yes.
always pulling from your experiences, because that's what people are going to resonate with when you write characters and dialogue. And I think that's the best first step. Like, no matter
Yep.
where you start, pull from life first. And no life is too boring, no life is like
Yeah.
too typical or the same or everyday. Like, everybody that I know who has done this approach has, some success to get moving and going. And, our friend Andrew, I think his name is Andrew. Oh, I'm spacing out his last name. But he has a book, and it's just literally 2 years of his life. He documented every day. He'd write one page or do one page
What's the book
panels.
called?
I think it's literally called a day. I'll shoot you a link after. I know it's in my
Okay.
bookcase downstairs. I'll have to look into
Okay.
him, but I believe his name is Andrew O. I got to do a little research to like stand that up. But
Okay.
yeah, it's really, I mean, that life method, I mean, you can't go wrong with it as practice,
No, that's
as
the
like
that's the
any
joy
form.
of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really one of those things where I would love to see what you have to say more in your books because I was just reading that short little Batman story that you had posted up. How you really got interested in Batman the animated series and how it captivated you and like kind of pulled you through with stuff. And I'm just like, dude, that was me at that age. Like I want to read
Yes.
more because I felt this exact same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was right. His name is Andrew O, but it's OH, like Andrew
Okay.
O, like literally O. But Day and Age is the comic that he put
Andrew
out.
O.H. Day and Age.
Yeah,
Cool. Wow.
really fun thing. Man, he's a great person, great human. I got to meet him at Baltimore Comic Con, and man, super cool dude. But I mean, and that's the thing. He kind of built his career off of
Wow. Yeah, this looks
how it's working.
beautiful.
Right, yeah. Fun stuff. And those are type of comics that like on your personal downtime, if you do a panel a day, a page a week type of
Right.
thing, it keeps you going, it keeps you flowing,
Wow.
and it's good practice.
And it's funny, I think I was already following him because I think I got hooked in because he's often an extra in movies, and
Oh, rad.
he started to make comics about from the perspective of being an extra in films.
Yes, that's right. Yep, that adds up. Yep.
So that
Mm,
because I'm an actor,
oh,
I
cool.
was like, "Ooh, this is." The funny thing is there's not a lot statistically, there's not a lot of people who make comics at a pretty intense level who are
Mhm.
also actors.
Very
So
true. I always hear people drop off, or they were directing and then they stopped and they switched to comic book making.
right.
I love how you're continuing your spectrum on both parts because it's
Yes.
a difficult thing to maintain, but you're one of the very few I've come across. You're right.
Well, thanks. But there is a small cluster of us. And so it's fun to see when I'm like, "Oh, here's another one. Here's another." I think I saw recently a stand-up comedian. I saw somewhere on social media someone who was a stand-up comedian who also made comics.
Oh
And I was
wow,
like,
how
"Ooh,
interesting.
that's a good crossover as well."
Yeah. So I mean, again, so much to pull off of that. And when you're talking about like, when you're writing jokes for stand up and trying to
Yes.
figure out,
Yes.
argument, proposal, conclusion, like you do with structure and whatnot,
Yes.
like, and
Yes.
you're like trying to format your joke in the punchline. That's a perfect page turner, and that's page turning
Mhm.
technique
Yes.
right there. All that type of stuff, panel reveals and everything. Really good stuff
Yes.
to
What do they always
study. And
say the end of every page should have a little mini cliffhanger so that
yep.
it entices you to go to the next page.
And so how did you get involved with Cosmic Lion at this point? And how did that
Yes.
relationship come about?
So essentially, so I had been making my own comics, and like I said, a friend had self-published, mini comics not all of them, but several of them we had physical versions of.
Mhm.
So many of them existed only as web comics.
Oh, wow.
And then as the years went on, I eventually got a connection at the New York Times, and then I was able to pitch comics. The New York Times actually does run comics. They just
Oh,
don't.
cool.
They're very sporadic. They're very
Yeah.
sporadic. But like every 4 months, in different sections of the newspaper, there will be like a full page, like the whole broadsheet page of the New York Times will be a short story comic.
Oh,
And
wow.
very
Cool.
often it's either an illustrated article or it's like a personal essay, which is illustrated like a comic book, like an
Mhm.
autobiographical reflection. Um,
Mhm.
anyway, so I got a connection there. I was able to pitch
Cool.
comics to the New York Times. And that was after about 6 years of doing my own indie, small indie stuff. And
Mhm.
then to my pleasant shock and pleasant surprise, they bought a lot of my ideas. So I did one a year. Now I had 4 years. I did one comic per year for the New York Times.
How cool.
Um, now it's funny because it's the New York Times, so that's great. But they'd never been in print anywhere other than a newspaper.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
it's online as a web comic on the New York Times website, but
Mhm.
as the years went by, I thought eventually I want to do a physical paperback that collects all of these comics, many of which are only web comics. They're only on the New York Times website and on some other smaller comic sites or medium level comic sites or whatever. Um, so eventually I thought, if I crank out, remember I said 2 or 3 short stories a year.
Yeah.
Well, after 8 or 9 years, you might have enough to fill a book. So the
Hmm.
goal was always in my head, eventually do a collection of short stories. And
Love
I
that.
began pitching to publishers. And no surprise, I'm not a name. I'm not famous. At this moment, I'm not a name. At this moment, I'm not famous. And maybe in the future, I will be. And so I'd kept my eyes on Eli Schwab for a number of years, mostly through the Facebook comics community that Eli has built up over many, many years. Even before COVID, I know Eli's comics community kind of grew dramatically during COVID because everyone was at
Hmm.
home freaking out, wanting to make
Yep.
art, you know.
Yep.
But even before COVID, I was aware of Eli and Cosmic Lion. Many years prior, Eli did a podcast. Cosmic Lion was originally Cosmic
Yep.
Lion Radio,
Yep.
right? Eli had a radio show that was about music, had some comics relating to it, but was primarily a music and comedy. Eli's also very into comedy. So I would
Hmm.
occasionally, and Eli sometimes did this podcast with a friend of his named Ben Granoff.
Yep.
These are like, Ben Granoff is a Brooklyn guy, and Eli is in Los Angeles. And so in the comics community, very similar to acting or music, you're always like keeping it like Adrian Veidt in Watchmen. You have all the screens in front of you, and you're
Yeah.
always kind of like keeping an eye on who's in the orbit of the world that the world that you're passionate about, whether it's
Yep.
comics, music, acting, movies, indie filmmakers. Um, and so I was like, you're always keeping, and as a publisher, right? You too, you're always keeping eyes. Ooh, look at that artist over there. That artist is growing. Maybe I want to ask that artist to do something next year or something.
Hmm.
So I kept an eye on Eli, and Cosmic Lion just kept growing. And then obviously, then Eli was publishing more. First, it was smaller zines. Then it was growing, and Eli started publishing more and more. And Cosmic Lion just kept growing. And I said, ooh, Cosmic Lion is every year the stuff was getting better and better. Every year the
Oh yeah.
production quality was getting better and better. And Eli, in the world of the arts, people's vibe is almost as important as the quality of their work,
Oh,
right? Would you
100%.
say?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah.
and for you,
Completely.
if someone seems like a jerk, but they're really good creatively, you might be a little less inclined to want to work with them. Has that been your experience a little bit?
Oh, dude, completely. We really try to filter the people we work with because we're all passionate about it. We're all excited.
Yes.
And so you need to have a certain formula with someone and someone who's encouraging and plays with the team and is, really
Yes.
confident, in themselves and sharing stuff and like just a good working relationship. I always have like a
Yes.
good call with creators before we start working together.
Yes.
And, I've even had instance where I feel like we're good to work together, but I didn't put that filter up and things fell apart in the long run. And I was like, well, you know
Interesting.
what? I skipped that filter. I skipped
Yes.
the sign
Yes.
on part, and it
Right.
shot me in the back
Like a
sometimes.
like a
But
sc- like a screening. It's almost like when you date someone, you want to have like a shared values, shared vibrational. You want to make
yeah,
sure this person isn't, I don't know, super opposed to things that you are passionately supporting. you know.
yeah. Honestly, yeah. There you go. Yeah,
Um,
I mean, you're in going into a very deep relationship and a lot of
yes.
trust and a lot of just sharing personal stuff and sharing their goals. Your art is
Yes.
very personal, and so when
Yes.
you're sharing that with someone and giving them the faith to publish it, there's a lot to risk on both sides. So I always go by
Yes.
the win-win or no deal type of moves, and I go for really great people. And we've been very fortunate for Kai Brown and Adam Matthew
Yes.
Smith and the B Comics guys that we're joining up with next month. All sorts of stuff. Yeah, but
Yes.
that vibe. has to be there. That connection, that's
Yeah.
vital to a good working relationship.
Yeah, you wanna trust the person and trust that the person, is gonna be a kind, supportive, friendly, and not about
Mhm.
ego. The great
Yeah.
paradox, of course, of all the arts is that you need a strong ego to make the work, but it needs to be the healthy kind of ego,
Yep.
not the selfish, self-obsessed, glorifying ego.
Yep. Just like what you're saying with envy, you know what I mean? It's that same
Yeah.
formula, like that
Yes.
envy I had that, artists have, or they have those skill sets, you drawing and doing your own comics. I have that deep envy, which drew, started me, which basically put me on a path where I started a live drawing show so I could learn how to draw.
Wow,
And
wow,
that like
that's so
put me on
cool.
a path. I'm putting out my first zine of all my first drawings, and like I'm working on some small stuff in the background with my art, but I'm
Yeah.
getting that confidence. But it started with that envy, that envy
Yeah.
of like, man, I want this, I don't have it, how do I get it? It wasn't
Yes.
what you were saying, that negative type. It was a drive, and I finally let
Yeah.
myself embrace that. And once I embraced it, dude, it's been great. I mean, I still get scared sometimes
Mhm.
before I hit the drawing board. Way
Oh,
easier
yeah,
for
I
me
do
to sit down
too.
and write. Yeah.
Yeah,
And but once you do it, it happens, and that magic
right.
happens. But you just have to sit down and be like, I got to sit down and do this. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
like you and your writing and all that type of stuff.
Yes.
Same type of mutual feeling. Resonated so much with that completely.
Yeah, it's almost like there's a healthy confidence and there's an
Hmm.
unhealthy arrogance.
Hmm.
And like I said, I never forgot that. If you feel envy, it's a neon sign saying you want to be doing that.
Yep.
Now, the dark side of that, I never want to, you don't want to deal with people. I'm never interested in tearing someone else down
Right.
if they're achieving great things. Good for them. I want them to achieve the
Yeah.
great things. I have no interest in it's not about throwing negative vibes.
Hmm.
Only good vibes means, that person over there is successful. That person over there is achieving something. If I feel envy, that tells me that I want to be doing that. So I better get started on my life doing
Yep.
it. you know,
Yep.
like like
Exactly. Exactly. Let
my
that be a
my
driving
wife my
factor.
wife runs marathons, and the great metaphor, it's like run your own race.
Hmm.
If
That's
if
great.
you feel envious, if I feel envious of an actor or a comics creator, that just means I need to go back to work doing my thing because that other
Hmm.
person has their thing, and that's okay. That's great. We want them to have their thing. Like it doesn't we don't need to cast aspersions on others. We need to only go back to our drawing board or whatever it is. Run You don't need to worry about what that person over there is doing. If it inspires you to hustle more, well then that's the healthy version.
That's the great way. And I
If
mean,
it if
plus
it
you learn how hard it was to get there. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like once you dive into it, you realize like, oh, they're there because they put in the hours and the time, and this is
Yes.
really, really difficult. So then
Yes.
that reminds you to kind of humble yourself, like, man, I'm working towards it. I want to get towards that goal, but I know they're only there because they put in way more time and hours
Yep.
than I do. Doesn't matter when you start, that could be a different age part, by all means, where you
Yes.
start writing, drawing, doing all that. It's just a matter of you starting and putting the time and investment into it.
Yes. There's
Takes away
the
that like negative side.
Yes. The old school phrase is blood, sweat, and tears. You got to
Yep.
put the hours in. The blood, sweat, and tears is the hours.
Hmm.
So essentially, I I kept my eye on Eli for a long time. And then I was already friends with Ben Granoff, and I made friends with Adam Lemna, who is the Relic Hunter guy, the Relic Hunter creator.
Yep.
Now, at this point, I don't even think he had started creating Relic Hunter, but I was friends with Adam through Eli's comic community. Also, Eli is he brings people together.
Yeah.
He's a
Very well.
And just like you have done and Mark has done with your publishing world, right?
Hmm.
We champion others. We're not only out to champion ourselves. It's special and it's good vibes if you are also championing others. And
Hmm.
Eli, I always noticed, I was very impressed. I was like, Eli's bringing people together. And
Yeah.
Eli's not about drama and he's not about gossip and he's not about no one's backstabbing anyone. It's all about let's raise everyone up together. And
Exactly.
you never got like a bad vibe. You never got a negative. You only like there's that t-shirt like good vibes only.
Yeah.
And I would say to myself, I'd be like, Eli is a good vibes only kind of a person. And that's the
It
kind of
really is.
person you want to be in business with. So I was trying to make overtures to Eli and I was trying to like, open up communication. But then when Adam was already tight with Eli, Adam Lemna,
Mhm.
uh, Adam was like, oh, let me offer. I think Eli could publish your book, and let me try to help that along. So I sent the stuff to Adam. Adam sent it to Eli. And just like so many things in life, when you have a personal recommendation from someone you're already friendly with, that speaks volumes more than like a cold email.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. And especially
So
that's what great about cons and everything and meeting them is that you get to
yes,
like taste them more and more and different experiences and like, learning from someone over the years and meeting them lets you know like, okay, I consistently am getting good stuff from this guy. It doesn't seem to
yes,
change from time to time from meeting them. And that consistency always really helps too, is that, I try to be like that on the show. And whenever I meet people, it's just like
yeah,
what you see is what you're going to get. And I'm never going to put like a facade. If you meet me like this in the show, I'm not different when you meet me at a
right,
convention or anything. It's the same
right.
personality. And that's
I
what's
mean,
cool is that you're not putting a face.
right. You're allowed to have a day where you're tired or sad, but
Yeah.
that's different,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even with the show, I'm probably a bit more alert and on it, you know what I mean? But like you're not gonna get like a celebrity version, and then like the behind the
Yes.
scenes version, Like, and that's what I admire about a lot of these creators that we work with, that who you see is what you get. And I love that because they're
Yes.
true and they're they're just absolutely true. And I love that. It's hard to find people, especially from music, and I'm sure from like the acting film world, where you
Yeah.
get two sides of a person many times and you're like, are we on the same page? But it doesn't
Yeah.
seem like it because we're fighting against each other in the background. And comics doesn't
Yeah.
have that.
Or you wonder like which is the real person kind of a thing.
Hmm. Exactly.
Um,
Very much so.
and it's also like we talk about, you know, I'm excited about my stuff, but I also want to hear about the other person's stuff. Like
Yep.
if someone takes up all the oxygen in the room and they only talk about themselves forever, well, then that's not really healthy either.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And it's good to share that, with our conversations with artists, is that we're
yes.
all very much coming with a student mindset. And all of us want to know how the other is doing and how they did it. And none of us are
Yes.
holding those secrets. And I think that's what's so exciting
Yeah.
and what keeps it so fresh for us, is because we're
Yeah.
constantly learning. We're constantly getting new advice because our community is open to that type of talks and discussions and whatnot, which again, rare in music. And I feel like rare in other industries as well, where there's a dividing line between the secrets they have to help them versus what they want to reveal.
Yeah, and like you said, when you go to cons, you go to events, and the most fun people, it's when you can compare notes and you share
Hmm.
experiences. Oh, I
Yep.
did this. What did you do? What was that like? And you learn from each other, just like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, it's wild. I love that. I mean, you brought together so much in this like hour we've been talking for the show. And it's so interesting to see the perspective behind it, your acting to comics ratio, like how you brought these forms together and it helped shape and develop you, and you're not stopping. You have larger goals ahead of you. I feel like you're just starting on a lot of these journeys, and that's so refreshing. Because when I see like creators get like bummed out at the start of their career, or
Right.
they start to fizzle out and they kind of don't see like where they can go, it's great hearing it from a creator that's just like, I'm at this spot, my goal is to get here no matter what. And you have
Yeah.
to always have that hope, and that you're gonna roll with the punches and you're gonna figure it out no matter what industry you're a part of.
Yeah.
And that's really admirable, because chasing
Thank you.
after different avenues gets, getting shot down once, or feedback sometimes even hurts, you know what I mean? So you constantly getting that in, it's building resilience within you, and you're just going to be like, well, that didn't work out, I'm gonna do this other two projects,
Yeah.
always have stuff lined up,
Yes. That's totally what it is. And acting for 20, 25, 20 plus years, you know, eventually you start to process that it's not rejection. It's just that they had 90 people to pick from and they happen to have not picked you. you
There you
know?
go. Yeah,
Um,
honestly.
and so once, just to get back to the previous quickly, once Eli did say, all right, I want to publish your book, I was so thrilled because Eli had not published an autobio book up to that point.
Ooh.
He had only done, sci-fi,
Mhm.
fantasy. He'd done Space Knights, which is an amazing book by
Yeah, super
Kevin
cool.
Anthony Catalan. And so, what I was also impressed about with Eli is that he said, I'm trying to diversify the line. So,
Nice.
he didn't want to only publish sci fi, adventure, space fantasy books. He
Mhm.
wanted to really change it up. And a lot of publishers don't always do that, right?
Right.
They kind of just turn out one genre of product. And so, and Eli and I also got to design the book together. And Eli treated me like gold. He was like, I want your vision, but he also contributed ideas. And very often, one of the greatest things in a collaboration is when you're like, oh, your idea, you have to have the humility to say, oh, your idea. I would say, oh, I have this idea. Eli would toss, and I would say, oh, your idea is better than mine, Eli. Let's do yours. Like, no
It's a
question.
healthy
Like you came
relationship
up,
too.
yeah, you came up with a genuinely better idea. I want your idea in the book,
Yeah.
and so I happen to have brought along a copy, and,
Love it.
and so I'm just so thrilled. The book is now in its second printing.
That's awesome. I'm so
Um,
lucky to have a copy. I was ecstatic to get that from you. I'm so hyped to
oh,
dive into it.
thank you. And I got Bill Sienkiewicz was very generous and gave me a quote for the back.
That's so awesome. I love that.
And that's
Love
talk
that so
about
much.
like your heroes. You eventually realize your
Yeah.
heroes are just flesh and blood people. And I was just so thankful to talk with him and that he was that he was open to even considering a quote. And Derek Robertson, who created The Boys with Garth Ennis,
Ooh, yeah.
gave us our cover on the quote on the cover. Um, and I wanted to credit the colorist. Griffin is the colorist who colored
Yeah.
80% of the book. And also, Griffin is the one who self published the mini comics of, I would say 30% of this book was originally, published by Griffin in those mini comics. So I wanted to, sometimes they don't put the colorist on the cover, but I said, let's put the colorist on the cover because in this case, the colorist, contributed the initial
Hefty part.
self-publishing of 30% of the contents and colored a lot of the earlier works and a lot of the works that were in the middle of my journey.
That's great. That's good. I mean, again, you're paying back to the community that gave to you. You know what I mean? And it's a
Yeah,
massive book
trying
and
to.
it's for $20, dude. That's a beautiful dude. Check
20
that out.
bucks. It's
Yeah.
220 pages.
Oh, it's
And by the
great.
way, I also Cosmic Lion just published this book
Yeah.
by Eisner winner Gideon Kendall and Doug
Mhm.
Latino. This is my gosh, this is 270 pages. And this is a
Wow.
hardcover. The reason I'm also plugging this book, these guys are terrific creators. I
Mhm.
illustrated two stories in this hardcover.
Oh, cool. Nice. It's great
Um,
seeing your work getting fleshed out like that too. I mean, just in
I'm
great
thankful. I'm
pieces.
thankful.
And,
And then
having those on your bookshelf, beautiful. You know what I mean? Just
yes,
beautiful.
yes. And so there's a New York Times journalist I became friends with who got me into the New York Times. And he's the guy that writes about comics for them. He's written over 800 articles
Oh, wow.
for the New York Times. So I bugged him for years to write his own stories, much like my friend 15 years ago had said, Tony, you have to finally write your own stories.
Mhm.
He eventually wrote a couple stories. I said, I want to illustrate one of them. We pitched it to the New York Times. To our sadness, they did not take the story. And so we got it published in do you know what McSweeney's is?
Yeah. That sounds, yeah. Yeah.
So McSweeney's is like an arts literary magazine that some
Mhm.
celebrities have been part of. Well, McSweeney's just bought this magazine, which is called The Believer.
Oh,
And The Believer has been going for several years, and it's comics, art, and literary stuff. So this is coming out in April,
Oh,
literally
how
next
cool.
month. And they published our 8-page short story. This is my friend George. And do you know who Chris Misi is? You might have recently interviewed him, I think. He has
No,
stuff
Chris
with
Macy doesn't
Cosmic
seem.
Lion. Christian
Well,
Misi.
might be having him on the show soon, but not yet.
He
Yeah.
has a thing called Turbo Hawk, a book called Turbo Hawk.
Oh, yeah, we're in talks to get him on. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I
Yes,
know what
and
book
he
you're talking
also
about.
was nominated for a Reuben Award for a book he did with Tony Fleeks called Time Shopper.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so cool.
So I asked him to color this story, and this is about when this New York Times journalist, he would write into comic book letter columns in the 80s. And the story is about all of the friendships he formed as a result of that community of letter column people.
Oh, cool.
So
Man, that's
this is
just like
him.
before online forums. Those letter columns are really what like brought a lot together. I love that.
Yes. So there's like him writing into Teen Titans.
Oh man.
We talk about Kurt Busiek was an old letter writer. Paul
Ooh,
Levitz used to write
yeah.
into letter columns. Roy Thomas, who there's a lot of obviously conflicting opinions
Yeah.
about. And Rob Liefeld drew this Titans zine in the early 80s that was like Xeroxed and stapled.
Oh,
That's
how
a
cool.
cover he drew from that. So we it's a whole thing about letter columns and old like letter column titles and stuff.
That is
So we're
awesome. Dude, that art is amazing.
oh, thank you. And this is going to be a web comic online at this website in
Okay.
starting next week.
Oh, how cool. Dude, that's awesome. We'll drop a link on that below as well so people could check it out.
I will. Thank you.
That's so exciting. I can't wait to check that out. And I love your style. You know, we're gonna be doing a live drawing show soon here. So I gotta bug you and
Oh,
we gotta
thank you.
talk about getting you on that. That'd be a lot of fun. Man, and it
And
looks
by the
like
way,
you have a
speaking of
lot of
which,
quality books.
thank you for having me on. I know I tend to ramble on and go in these like circuitous, long, rambling tangents. So
It is
thank you
the
for being
best.
patient with me as I ramble.
It is the best. I mean, and that's the greatest thing about getting interviews like this too, because you know, you get a creator and you just have so much to share. You know what I mean? And there's so much experience and knowledge. And that's what like I love hearing is just like your story, your path, and how you wound up and where you're wanting to go after this, you know, because the struggles and rewards of comics are few and far. The struggles outweigh the rewards
Yes,
a whole
yes.
lot more, to be honest. But those rewards are so amazing,
Yeah.
and you just showing off the 3 stories, or your book and the other 2 stories, like that's what it's all about. You know what I mean? Like getting into there and sharing
Yeah.
that and being part of that community in those books, and it's inspiring. You know, you've pushed through a lot and you've balanced a lot to get there as well.
Trying to juggle it all. I'm showing one. I did a comic which I'm in the middle of. It's Yoda, the Star Wars figure of Yoda, back when
Oh
Yoda
man.
was like a character that was brand new and like blew our minds.
Yes. Oh my gosh, how cool.
And Yoda says, "Never seen anything like me. You have."
I love it. Man,
Anyway,
that's so much fun, Tony. Dude, I'm so glad we came across each other very randomly at the convention as well. I think we kind of just bumped into each other and started talking. It
yes,
almost
yes.
feels like it, you know? And I can't wait to see what you're gonna be producing after this and what you have in the works. And I'd love to see some of your more of your acting work. Maybe we could talk behind the scenes where you could send me
Oh,
something.
thank you.
And
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm thankful to share, and I want to read. You know, I want to read your stuff, and I want to learn more about all that you guys are doing.
Yeah, definitely. We'll be trading some files and everything. And next convention, since we aren't too far from each other, we'll be bumping into each other at conventions pretty
Yes,
often, I feel.
yes.
But before we sign off, why don't you tell us, like, you know, not only where to find you and all your work, but what you're going to be up to during the rest of 2024?
Okay, so my website, the website is like 2/3 acting and 1/3 comics, but it's TonyWolfActor.com. And my name has no E at the end. Sometimes people subconsciously find themselves adding an E at the end, which is fine. It's just
Like
not
that
not
Gene Wolfe
literally my
type
my
of,
spelling. Yeah, like
like
Tony
that
Wolfie,
Gene Wolfe.
or
Oh, there,
yes,
yeah, Tony Wolfie too.
or
There
the
you
the
go.
famous novelist Thomas Wolfe has an E at the end, I believe.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So it's TonyWolfActor.com. My Instagram and Twitter, which I still call Twitter because I refuse to call it X, is
Same.
Tony Wolfness. Like the essence of me is my Tony Wolfness. That's what led to the to those silly names.
That was the best.
You can probably read. I think you can read all of my New York Times comics. I think for free. You know those magazines? They say you can read 10 articles per month, and then you have to pay.
Mhm.
So if you Google Tony Wolfe, New York Times, they will come up. This magazine called The Believer, I think is it thebeliever.org? Anyway, look up Tony Wolfe, The Believer, starting April 1st. Not an April Fool's joke, but you'll see a story I illustrated for this wonderful journalist whose name is George Gustines. And I actually got to do a Super Bowl commercial as an actor about 2 months ago, which has led to some dramatic doors being opened in Hollywood. I'm praying and manifesting that more good things will come as a result of this new level of exposure. I did a thing for CBS Sports and Paramount, playing one of the most famous football figures in football history, which is funny because you look at this skinny nerd and you wouldn't necessarily think football, but I have, honestly, I'm getting to a point, and Brandon, I don't know, we'll talk about, what life is like. I can't wait to get rid of the day job or graduate from the day job because I have a lot of art I want to make. I have a lot of stories I want to write. And if the heavens smile upon me, I have a lot of acting I want to do professionally. And recently, I want to get back to these pages of comics, and I haven't had time. So I'm eager to start getting back to comics.
Yes, I love hearing that too, and I think that's the goal for all of us is just working through that day job and just so we can make the art we know we can make and the art we want to make, and it's, blood, sweat, and tears, like you said, to try to get it done.
Yeah.
But until we get to that point, we're going to keep working towards it.
And there
I
are,
admire that.
my wife reminds me, my wife, Jen, who's super supportive. And I remind myself, there are ways to squeeze 1 or 2 hours, every 3 days you could squeeze an hour in and those build up.
Yeah. And honestly, yeah, just doing it for that little bit of time, it'll add up. It's better than nothing, and you'll feel a lot better once it's complete and be like, well, at least I did it over a span of a month, even though I knew I could have done it in a week. But hey, it's complete. And that's what matters is completing the story more than anything.
Yeah.
Any convention plans or anything this year?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. There's one. This is a new indie convention. It's called BICS, BICS. Have you heard of this?
No, I haven't yet.
St. Mark's Comics, one of the main employees of St. Mark's Comics, started it 2-3 years ago. It's almost like when Mocha first started out.
Yeah. Is it a Brooklyn thing, actually?
It's a Brooklyn thing, yes.
Okay, I think I have heard of it then, yeah.
BICS stands for Brooklyn Independent Comics Showcase.
Okay, I have. Yeah, I didn't realize that was the acronym for it. That's cool.
And I think it's in like 3 weeks. Oh my gosh, I think it's in like 2 or 3 weeks. You know what? Hold on, let me just. BICS.
I had a friend just tell me about that actually. That they're going to be tabling there everything. Our friend Javi.
Brooklyn Independent Comics Showcase. It is April 22nd.
Oh, cool.
April 22nd. So I will be there selling lots of comics.
Nice.
Lots of comics.
Love it.
Yes. Other than that, it's funny. I have always kept my head down and focused on the acting and the comics. I've gone to conventions, but I only go to conventions in the New York City area because I haven't had time or bandwidth or money to like go to, Rhode Island or go to Maryland or go to other places for the most part. I went to San Diego Comic-Con once for like a day, and that was a big trip, but
it's a fun time too. Yeah. If we ever get you at another convention, we'll find a way to get you out and to hang out and do something outside the state. But if not, I will visit you in New York and we will hang out at a convention there. I'd love that.
Well, I also want to shill myself out real quick. I've been used as a moderator for various comics panels,
Ooh,
um,
cool.
where I get to be like a talk show host, and I
Mhm.
get to let the other people do most of the talking, and I'm sort of a facilitator. And I just did that for this book, for Wait It Gets Worse. I did this at a bookstore with Doug Latino and Eisner winner Gideon Kendall. Um, and I got asked to do that for a graphic novel. You know, Abrams publishes a
Yeah.
lot of graphic novels. I'm the moderator for a new graphic novel published by Abrams. Uh,
Ooh.
that's gonna be at the Society of Illustrators in September.
Oh, how
Um,
cool.
and it's a graphic novel. It's another like nonfiction thing that a friend of mine wrote, Julian Vologe, he's a German writer who lives in Brooklyn. And he did a
Mhm.
graphic novel about the deep cuts history of the Statue of Liberty itself. And
Wow.
all of the funding, the creation of it, how it got here, the political stuff between France and the US. And so I'm very thankful and excited. I'm gonna get to be the moderator for that debut in September.
Oh, how fun. Moderating panels is just so much fun. I have a blast whenever
Yes.
I get the opportunity to do it. It's just, and plus it is fun and easy. You know, and we get to kick back a little bit and let them run the
Yeah.
show and like have them and just dive into it.
Yeah.
That's so exciting, dude. I love how much you have going on and I love how much we get to hear from you more. We're definitely
Thanks.
gonna get you back from
It's
the
where cheesy actor and comics can cross over.
yes.
I can be a talk show host.
Yes, I love it. It's we got to see what we got to dive in craft wise and like dive into some of your career a bit more next time we talk and bring you back on the show.
Thank
And
you. I
we'll
would love to.
definitely get you on the drawing stuff because there's so much I'm sure you could teach and share and just, just we'll have fun with it. It's such a great thing
Thank
that
you.
we're
I would love
planning.
to.
You're going to have a blast. But
Let me
oh,
do a quick hard cut to my puppy who needs to go outside. So Daisy, let's let this puppy outside. Wait, there you go,
perfect
Daisy.
timing.
Okay, there she goes. There she goes.
Love it.
There goes the puppy.
Perfect.
Well, thank you. I know she was whining, so I wanted to thank you so much, Brandon. Seriously, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it's always a blast and a pleasure to talk to you. I could go on with for hours for you, and we had to cut our conversation short at the con too because we knew we were going to get stuck with each other, just
Yes. And
rambling
by the
on.
way,
I love
that
it.
guy I introduced you to, Jesse,
Hmm.
that book that when he I keep saying your book is going to be a huge hit because
It's
he was raised in a cult, and it's an autobiographical piece about it, and he's quick to make it clear this is not like a sex sensationalized thing. It's more like a deep reflective memoir about what it was like to be brought up there, and not
yeah,
like a tawdry kind of cheap. Nothing wrong with tawdry sex, but this is. He's just saying his book is it's not like a garish kind of thing.
mm,
He keeps saying, I feel like I should be his manager. I'm like, dude, this thing's gonna be a huge success. And he's like, it's gonna take me 5 years to finish drawing it. I'm like, well, when it's done,
it's gonna be great.
it's gonna win awards. Like that guy is really won. His name is what is his last name? Jesse.
I'm
His
spacing.
his
I'll look at the
Instagram
list.
his Instagram is Fourth Wall Comics. Fourth, like the number four, fourth wall. Hold on one second. Jesse Lambert. Everyone should just remember the name Jesse Lambert. Um, it's Fourth Wall Comics, and
Okay, cool.
when as his book, I think he's going to like release little short story glimpses of it. He's
Mm.
a really wonderful writer and illustrator. His style is very unique, and I think great things are going to happen for Jesse Lambert.
Dude, and I was just looking at those preview pages he had in there with the smaller zines, and
Yeah.
it gorgeous art. Like, man, that was
Also,
breathtaking.
just a very nice person, which also matters. You know?
Yes, yeah. Especially when you go up to a table and you need to talk to him and learn more about it.
Yeah,
He was more than gracious with everything.
yeah,
Another person I need to get on the show and talk to and hang out with for a
yeah.
little bit
Please
as well.
do that.
Yeah.
He's, I have a whole list. Like I kept an eye on Eli years ago, and then he published my book. I have a list of people who I just think these like 38 people are amazing, and they're going to be massive successes. That guy Kevin Anthony Catalan, by the way, who I think you had on your
Yeah.
show.
Not yet, but he's on our list.
he's I can't say it publicly, but he's got some huge stuff in the works. And
Ooh,
it's almost like, you know how Jesse Lonergan got handpicked by Mike Mignola?
yeah.
That's about to happen with Kevin Anthony Cadillac.
Dang, that's exciting. That's super exciting. I love hearing that for creators. And that's the
Yes.
thing. We celebrate their successes because their
Yes.
success gives us more of a chance of success. And people forget that. Like we need
Yes.
to all have that success. And like what you're doing, promoting other people, encouraging our audience to
Yes.
go check out these other creators. And any little help, it makes the biggest difference. And you do that by
Yes.
being like a good, humble person and a great creator and
Yeah.
passionate for your craft. And by just
Well, it's
having
funny.
fun with other creators.
Yes. About the acting thing, very quick, but the metaphor applies to everything. Bryan Cranston said, if you audition for a job, an acting job, and you go to the final round, and if you don't get it, be happy for the person who got it. Like, and he
Yeah.
said, and it's the same thing with comics. He said, think of it. He said, it's like finding someone else's wallet. If you find someone else's wallet that fell on the ground, you return it to the real person and you're thankful that they got their wallet back. You're not
Yeah.
thinking about how to steal the wallet, like
Honestly. And especially when you're in a community where, all of us are trying to sell your book at a convention and
yes,
it's, all of us are in a stadium essentially holding our book to the one person in center stage to
yes,
buy it, having that if that person picks one or two of someone's books, that's a gateway into indie comics and we should be happy that that person is even supporting indie comics and that way that love can get, grow and spread and they could tell their friends and you're no longer shouting at one person, you're shouting at another 10,000 fans to like sell a
yes.
book to. And that's the goal. Indie comics just revolutionizing and really being more on the forefront of the industry overall.
Yeah. And I think publishing groups like yours and like Cosmic Lion,
Mm.
that's going to be the boom and the Drawn and Quarterly and the Fantagraphics of the very near future.
Honestly, we and the way things are planning out and looking and the way creators are, inching towards publishers like us and what we're doing for the community, I'm hopeful that our plans are working and it's all happening. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So we're going to be excited to see where things are 5, 10 years down the line and how it all
Yes.
looks. And looking back at conversations like these that are enriched with information because we're just spilling the secrets here, basically. You know what I mean? Giving
Yeah.
it all out. Yeah.
And the funny thing, it's not even that they're that secret. It's put in the work, which is not glamorous. you know,
Yeah.
the
To be honest.
the glamour comes later. The glamour
Yeah.
comes after the blood, sweat, and tears.
And it just kind of looks like that when you're at a convention where you're just like, oh, I have all this set up, but like years and weeks and days of just
Yeah.
add it and add it and add it. I love
Yeah.
it. Tony, thank you so much for joining us and for this great conversation. I
Thank
can't wait
you.
for
Thank
us to
you.
bring you back and we'll hang out soon and do some drawing stuff and so much more. So keep us posted on all your work. I'll always be excited. And for all of our listeners, don't forget all the usuals like, comment, subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on the show. Share all the links and, really promote it because we have great indie creators out here
We
doing our
got
stuff.
lots of stuff. We got lots
So
of
many
stuff.
amazing
Let's
comics.
go into
And
it.
always remember, stay creative. And thanks for hanging. Stay creative and stay inspired. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Tony. Looking for high quality printing, fast turnaround, and the industry's best customer service? Look no further than Comics Wellspring. Trusted by thousands of indie comic creators, Comics Wellspring is proven to be the go to comic book printer. So when you're ready to bring your comic books to life, go to comicswellspring.com and be sure to check out one of the best platforms to sell your physical and digital comics online, the CWS Bookstore. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell to see our lives come out twice every single week on YouTube and podcast platforms. And also tag us when you share your favorite episodes and moments from the show. And remember, creators, thanks for hanging, keep creating, and stay inspired.